The year is 2004. The place is the Polk County Agricultural Extension Office. A young analyst named Mark slides a transparency over a topographical map. The transparency shows property deeds, lines and names overlaid on the soft green and brown of the land. He is checking water rights. He is looking for discrepancies. His finger traces a creek bed. It runs through a dozen parcels. He stops. He leans closer to the map. One name appears again, and again, and again. E. Mayhew. He pulls the individual deeds from the file. Parcel 7B, 15 acres, inherited 1979. Parcel 7C, 5 acres, purchased 1981. Parcel 8A, 10 acres, purchased 1983. The list goes on, a patchwork of purchases, stitched together over 25 years, forming one contiguous block of land, 917 acres. He checks the financing statements. He expects to see the bank's name, the Farm Credit Service's name. He sees nothing. No liens, no mortgages, no debt listed against any of the deeds. Every single purchase. Mark goes silent. The hum of the fluorescent lights fills the room. He knows Eliza Mayhew. Everyone in the county knows her. She's the jam lady, the quiet woman who sells jars of wild berry jam at the Saturday market. She drives an old blue Ford pickup. She wears denim shirts and worn leather gloves. He thought she lived on a little plot of land up on the ridge, a hobby farm. He picks up the phone. He calls his boss, a man named Henderson, Frank Henderson, the retired president of the regional bank, now a consultant for the county. "Frank," he says, "you're not going to believe this. I'm looking at the Mayhew properties. On the other end of the line, there is only silence, a long, deep silence that holds a quarter-century of certainty, of being wrong. This is the kind of story that gets lost, the quiet ones, the ones that happen over decades, not in a single moment. We tell those stories here, the ones about the people who were counted out, the ones who prove the world wrong, not with words, but with work. If you believe these are the stories that matter, the ones that need to be told, hit that subscribe button. Because what happened on that land is a lesson, and the story of how it started, well, that's where the truth is. Let's go back. The year is 1979. Eliza Mayhew is 22 years old. She stands in the yard of her family's farm. It is not a big farm. 15 acres of rolling hillside, a small white house that needs paint, a barn with a swayback roof. It is all she has left. 6 months earlier, her husband David was killed. A logging accident up on the mountain. A falling widowmaker. A single moment that erased her future. It left her with his memory and his medical bills. $7,000 of debt, a fortune in 1979. The farm was barely breaking even before. Now, it felt like an anchor, pulling her under. She had a choice: sell the land, pay the debts, move to town, find a job at the textile mill. This was the sensible path, the one everyone advised. But Eliza had an idea, a small one, rooted in the soil she stood on. Her grandmother had taught her about the wild berries, the ones that grew in the thickets along the creek. Blackberries, huckleberries, foxgrapes. She knew the recipes. She knew how to turn them into something sweet, something that tasted like summer. Her idea was to plant 3 acres of cultivated berries, proper rows, irrigation. It would take a loan, not a big one, $5,000, enough for rootstock, for fencing, for a small walk-behind tractor. She put on her only good dress. She drove her husband's old truck into town. She walked into the cool, quiet air of the regional bank, and she sat down across the desk from a man named Frank Henderson. Frank Henderson was a good man. Everyone in the county would tell you that. He served on the church board. He coached Little League for 15 years. His family had been in the valley since the 1800s. He was the president of the bank. He saw his job as protecting the community's wealth, which meant protecting people from their worst ideas. He listened patiently to Eliza. He nodded. He looked at the simple proposal she had written out on notebook paper. He took off his glasses. He polished them with a handkerchief. "Eliza," he said. His voice was kind. It was paternal. It was the voice of gentle authority. "I knew your father. I knew your grandfather. Good men, hard workers, but farming is a hard business." He opened a file on his desk. He showed her charts, profit margins for small farms, commodity prices, debt-to-income ratios. The numbers were grim. He turned a page. "Look at this," he said. "The failure rate for new agricultural ventures, especially specialty crops. It's over 80% in the first 3 years. 80%. Eliza felt the air leave her lungs. She was not a numbers person. She was a dirt person, a berry person. Frank leaned forward. He folded his hands on the polished mahogany desk. "What you're proposing is a hobby, a fine hobby, but it's not a business the bank can invest in. A $5,000 loan on a 15-acre property, with your existing debt. The underwriters would never approve it. I would never approve it." He paused. He looked at her with genuine concern, the kind of concern that feels heavier than anger. "Let me give you some advice, as a friend of your family. Sell the farm. The developers are paying good money for ridgeline property. You could clear your debts, have a nice nest egg, find a good man, settle down. You're a young woman. You shouldn't be carrying this burden alone." Eliza just sat there. Her hands were folded in her lap. She felt small. She felt foolish. He wasn't being cruel. He wasn't being dismissive. He was being kind. And that was the worst part. He genuinely believed he was saving her. He stood up. The meeting was over. "I'm sorry, Eliza. I won't be the man who lets a good young woman like you lose her family's land." He said it with the absolute certainty of a man who had never been wrong. He walked her to the door. He patted her shoulder, a gesture of protection, a gesture of dismissal. It was the kindest no she had ever received. It was also the most absolute. She drove home. The truck rattled on the gravel road. Her hands were shaking on the steering wheel. It was not anger she felt, not contempt, something softer, and in some ways, worse. It was the cold, hollow feeling of being erased, of having her capability decided for her by someone else, someone who thought they knew best. She parked the truck by the barn. She didn't go inside the house. She walked to the porch swing. Her grandmother was there, shelling peas into a large metal bowl. Her hands were old, knotted with arthritis, but they moved with a steady, practiced rhythm. She didn't look up as Eliza sat down. She heard it in her granddaughter's footsteps. She heard it in the silence. Eliza told her everything. The drive to town, the mahogany desk, the charts and numbers, the kind voice telling her she couldn't, telling her to sell, telling her to find a man to carry her burden. When she finished, the porch was quiet. Only the sound of peas dropping into the bowl. Ping, ping, ping. Her grandmother finished the last pod. She set the bowl aside. She looked at Eliza's hands, clenched into fists in her lap. Then she looked out, past the yard, past the leaning fence posts, to the dark soil of the garden. She took a long, slow breath. "They took his body," she said. Her voice was soft but clear as a bell. "They can't take the dirt." She reached over and touched Eliza's hand. Her skin felt like paper. "The dirt is enough, child. The dirt is enough. It was not a pep talk. It was not a rallying cry. It was a statement of fact, as fundamental as bedrock. In that moment, something shifted in Eliza. The hollowness filled with something hard, something quiet, something that would last for the next 25 years. She would not ask for permission again. She would not ask for a loan. She would not ask for anything. The dirt was enough. That winter, she did not clear the land. She didn't have the money. She had something else. Generations of knowledge. She walked the creek beds. She marked the places where the wild berries grew thickest. She pruned them, fed them with compost from the barn. She read old books from the library, books on soil health, on canning, on botany. She learned the science behind her grandmother's wisdom. That spring, the berries came in, thick and heavy on the vines. She picked them herself. Her hands were stained purple for weeks. She used her grandmother's old pressure canner, a huge, heavy pot from the 1940s. The gasket on the lid was cracked. She couldn't afford a new one. So she improvised. She cut a new seal from an old bicycle inner tube. She sealed the edges with a paste of flour and sugar. It was not pretty, but it held pressure. She made 212 jars of jam, wild blackberry, elderberry apple, spiced fox grape. Each jar was filled to the brim, sealed with a lid and a ring. She hand-wrote each label. Mayhew Farms, established 1979. The first Saturday in June, she loaded the jars into the truck. She drove to the county farmers market. She didn't have a fancy tent. She had a card table, a folding chair, and a hand-painted sign. The other farmers looked at her. They saw a young widow with a little hobby. Then people started tasting the jam. A woman bought a jar of blackberry. She came back 10 minutes later. She bought 3 more. She told her friends. The word spread through the market. They tasted something in that jam, something more than fruit and sugar. They tasted the wildness of the creek bed. They tasted the patience of a long winter. They tasted the quiet defiance of a woman who was told no. She sold out in 2 hours. She packed up her empty jars and her card table. She counted the money in the truck. $424. Cash. It was not $5,000, but it was a start. It was hers, earned not from a loan, but from the dirt and her 2 hands. The dirt was enough. The next few years were a quiet battle, fought with sugar and pectin, with boiling water and sterilized jars. The men at the feed store would talk. They'd see her truck, loaded with crates of berries. Jam money, they'd say. They would chuckle. It wasn't mean-spirited. It was just the easy confidence of men who dealt in cattle, in tobacco, in things they considered real farming. They saw her as a novelty, the jam lady. But the women of the county knew. They bought her jam every week. They knew the work that went into each jar, the hours of picking, the standing over a hot stove, the precision of a perfect seal. They were her first investors, her silent partners. One afternoon, her old Farmall Cub tractor wouldn't start. She had bought it for $200 from a junkyard. She was trying to get a small patch of land tilled. The engine would turn over, then die. She was covered in grease, frustrated. An old farmer named Abernathy pulled over. He was a man of few words. He watched her for a minute. Then he walked over. He didn't ask if she needed help. He just pointed at the carburetor. "Fuel line's clogged," he said. He took out his pocket knife. He spent the next 20 minutes showing her how to clean it, how to adjust the fuel-air mixture. When he was done, the tractor started with a puff of blue smoke. It hummed like a giant insect. Eliza tried to thank him, tried to pay him. He just shook his head. Your granddaddy gave my father a wagon load of hay back in '58, the year of the drought. Called it even. He got back in his truck and drove away. He was her first real ally. A quiet recognition from the world of men, a world that ran on old debts and silent understanding. Have you ever been told you couldn't do something? Not by an enemy, but by a friend. By someone who thought they were protecting you from failure. That's the hardest wall to climb. Because it's built with the bricks of kindness, of concern, of certainty. Drop a comment below and tell me about a time you had to prove someone wrong who thought they were helping you. Because what Eliza did next, it wasn't for the men at the feed store. It wasn't even for Frank Henderson. It was for her grandmother. It was for the dirt. And let me tell you about the next 25 years. This is where the story accelerates, where the rhythm picks up. By 1981, she had paid the last of the medical debt, every single dollar. She took her profits from the jam. She bought the 5 acres bordering her creek, the one with the thickest wild berry patches. Cash. By 1983, she had 300 cultivated berry bushes in the ground. Black raspberries, boysenberries. She bought Mr. Abernathy's 10 acres when he retired. He sold it to her for less than market value, a nod to a debt paid long ago. Cash. By 1985, she built a small commercial kitchen, a concrete block building behind her house, a gleaming steel sink, a 6-burner stove, a walk-in cooler. She hired 2 other women from the town, widows like her. She paid them a fair wage. She bought the 20-acre parcel to the west, the one with the southern exposure, perfect for grapes. Cash. Frank Henderson would drive past on his way to the golf course. He saw the changes. First, the new fence posts, then the neat rows of berries, then the concrete block building. He saw the refrigerated truck that started making weekly pickups. He saw the new sign she put up at the end of her driveway, Mayhew Farms. He felt something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't regret, not exactly. It was a feeling of profound miscalculation, like a mathematician who finds a flaw in a proof he has trusted his entire life. By 1990, she had 80 acres. She was selling jam to stores in 3 states. She bought a new tractor, a John Deere 2320. She paid for it on the spot, cash. The man at the dealership was stunned. He was used to financing farmers for 5-10 years. He had never seen someone write a check for a new tractor, especially not a woman. By 1995, she owned 200 acres. She had diversified. Peaches, apples. She sold fresh fruit in addition to the jam. She had a crew of 10 people. She was one of the largest employers in her part of the county. The men at the feed store didn't call it jam money anymore. They just called her Mrs. Mayhew. By 2000, she had 500 acres. She had perfected a system of organic farming, cover crops, no-till agriculture. Her soil was black and rich. Her yields were 20% higher than the county average. While other farmers were struggling with debt, with fluctuating commodity prices. She was insulated. She had no debt. She set her own prices. She sold directly to consumers and specialty stores. She had built a business model based on a rejection letter from a bank. She had turned a no into an empire of dirt and sugar. And then came 2004, the year of the map, the year of the great drought. The summer of 2004 was brutal. The sky was a pale, hazy blue for weeks. The rain just stopped. The cornfields turned brown and brittle. The leaves on the soybean plants curled and died. The big farms were in trouble. The ones with massive tractors and massive bank loans. They had planted fence row to fence row. Their soil was depleted. Their crops were thirsty. Their wells were running dry. But up on the ridge, at Mayhew Farms, something was different. The berry bushes were green. The peach trees were heavy with fruit. The grapevines were thriving. Eliza had spent years building her soil's resilience. The deep mulch held moisture. The cover crops prevented erosion. 15 years earlier, she had dug a deep, spring-fed pond at the lowest point of her property. People thought she was crazy. Now, she used a solar-powered pump and drip irrigation. She gave her plants just enough water, exactly where they needed it. She wasn't just surviving the drought, she was prospering. One afternoon in August, a dusty sedan pulled up her driveway. An old man got out. He moved slowly. His shoulders were slumped. It was Frank Henderson. He was 80 years old. His certainty had been weathered away by time. Eliza was in the barn sorting peaches. She watched him approach. She felt no triumph, no anger, just a strange, quiet sense of completion. He didn't look her in the eye at first. He looked at the crates of perfect peaches. He looked at the healthy green of the fields beyond the barn. "My son's farm is going under," he said. His voice was raspy. He bought the old Miller place down in the valley, leveraged himself to the hilt. The corn is a total loss. The bank is going to call his note. Eliza waited. She knew this wasn't a request for money. Frank Henderson had too much pride for that. He finally looked at her. His eyes were watery. "How did you do it?" he asked. "All these years. How did you make this place work when everyone else is failing?" He wasn't asking about the jam anymore. He was asking about the land, about the soil, about the deep wisdom he had dismissed as a hobby 25 years ago. He was finally admitting he was wrong. He was asking for her help. Eliza picked up a peach. She turned it over in her hands. The skin was warm from the sun. She looked at this man, this kind man who had tried to protect her, this gatekeeper who had, without malice, set her on a harder, better path. She could have listed her accomplishments. She could have reminded him of his charts and his certainties. She could have gloated. But she was her grandmother's granddaughter. She remembered the feeling in that bank, the quiet devastation of being told no. Proving someone wrong who thinks they're being kind is the loneliest fight there is. She met his gaze. Her voice was steady. It was quiet. It held no accusation, only truth. "You told me farming was too risky for a woman," she said. "You told me to sell the dirt." She paused and let the silence hang in the warm air. "But the dirt is enough." She walked over to a small refrigerator. She took out a jar of wild blackberry jam. She handed it to him. Then she took a notepad from the wall. She wrote down 3 things: the name of a cover crop seed, a method for digging a swale to catch what little rain might fall, and the phone number of a man who could help his son transition a small field to organic berries. She gave him the piece of paper. "Tell your son to start with this," she said. "Start with the soil." Frank Henderson took the jar. He took the paper. He couldn't speak. He just nodded. He walked back to his car, a shrunken figure in the vast, green success of the woman he had underestimated. He had come seeking a secret, a magic formula. She had given him something far more simple, and far more difficult, the truth he had refused to see. Eliza Mayhew didn't just build a farm, she built an alternative, a different way of thinking about wealth, about land, about community. In 2006, she brought together a dozen other small producers, vegetable growers, cheesemakers, beekeepers, women mostly, people who were working small plots of land, people who were invisible to the big agricultural banks. She helped them form the Appalachian Growers Cooperative. She used her own money to build a distribution center, a place where they could aggregate their products, a place where they could get a fair price. She never took a salary for running it. She said her payment was seeing other people keep their land. In 2010, She endowed a scholarship at the State Agricultural College, the Eliza Mayhew Scholarship for Women in Soil Science. It went to young women from rural counties, women who had dirt under their fingernails, women who, a generation earlier, would have been told to find a good husband. She never borrowed a single dime in her life. She never owed anyone anything. Her freedom was rooted in her self-sufficiency. She had proven that you could grow, deeply, sustainably, without asking for permission. Today, Mayhew Farms is over 900 acres. It is run by her daughter, Sarah, and her niece, Emily. They employ 30 people from the local community. They export jam and fruit preserves to 5 countries. They practice the same soil-first farming that Eliza perfected. They are a model of regenerative agriculture, studied by universities around the world. And Frank Henderson's son? He took Eliza's advice. He converted 10 acres to organic berries. It was hard. He nearly went bankrupt twice, but he survived. He saved the family farm. He never spoke to Eliza again. But every year, on the first Saturday in June, he goes to the farmer's market, and he buys a single jar of wild blackberry jam. He leaves the money on the table and walks away. A quiet annual admission, a silent thank you. In the main room of the new farmhouse, the one Eliza built in 1998, cash, there is a large stone fireplace. On the mantelpiece, among family photos, sits a single glass jar. It's an old ball mason jar. The glass is thick and slightly bubbled. The label is faded, written in a young woman's careful handwriting. Mayhew Farms, Wild Blackberry, 1979. It is one of the original 212 jars. Eliza's granddaughter, who is studying soil science on her great-grandmother's scholarship, sometimes picks it up. She runs her finger over the faded label. She feels the weight of it in her hands. It is not just a jar of jam. It is an artifact, a testament, proof that a rejection can be a redirection, that a closed door can force you to build your own house. The most dangerous limitation is not the one screamed by an enemy. It is the one whispered by a friend, the one delivered with a kind smile, the one meant to protect you. Because you cannot fight it with anger. You can't argue with its logic. You can only fight it with your life's work, with decades of quiet, relentless proof. You can only fight it by getting up every single day and tending to your own soil. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is sitting across a polished desk. They are being told they can't. They are being told they aren't enough. They are being told to sell their land, to give up their dream, to let someone else carry their burden. If you are that person, remember this story. If you know that person, share this story with them. Let them know that the world's certainty is no match for their own work. Let them know that sometimes, when everything else is stripped away, the dirt is enough. Thank you for listening. Subscribe for more stories of the quiet fighters and the legacies they build.